Will, thank you so much for coming on to the Progress Pure podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
So I kind of wanted to, well, first I'll let you introduce yourself before I kind of splurge about my reactions to your amazing book. So please introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Will Storr. I'm an author. I was a journalist for most of my career, and now I just sort of mostly write books. And so I've written a few books. I've written Selfie, which is about kind of internet culture and the Western self-obsession. And I've written The Science of Storytelling, which is obviously what we're here to talk about this afternoon, so amongst other things.
I originally came across the science of storytelling because my friend who has a podcast who talks about books, shout out and Need to Read, he spoke about the science of storytelling. And, in all honesty, before I read about it or read the book, I thought, oh, I bought it and then I was like, oh, this is going to be a book that tells me like how to tell a story in like when I walk into a board meeting, or like how to convince someone, and like really pull on their empathetic heartstrings and like win, blah, blah, blah. And then I started reading it and I just wasn't expecting, it was like such an existential almost like angle on everything, like making me question, am I in charge of any of the decisions that I make? Have I been kind of looking at life through my own paradigm completely and not actually understanding or seeing what other people see at all, which was like mind blowing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to do, really. I could have pitched it to the publisher as a guide to how to tell stories, but really, so the previous two books, Selfie and before that, The Heretics, had both looked at. The Heretics was about why intelligent people believe crazy things. So, like, why does somebody smart, believe in a conspiracy theory or is anti-vaccination or whatever? And so the answer that I came upon was this idea that the brain isn't really interested in the truth. It's interested in telling a story about the world, and the story that it most wants to tell is one in which you're the hero. And so that was sort of that book. And then when I wrote Selfie, I kind of found the other half of that answer, which was also about kind of culture and how culture influences the story we tell of the world. And what I wanted to do was sort of put them together in one book. So it was also, so kind of like How to Tell a Story was like the excuse to bring those two books together into one kind of quite short book.
So was that original book or the one that you just mentioned, The Heretics? Is that right?
Right, yeah, The
Yeah.
Heretics, yeah.
And so when you were researching for that, if you kind of came to this conclusion that, oh, our brains are telling stories the whole time, was that a moment that was like a penny drop for you, that you were like, oh, or was it something that from doing research you kind of came to terms with understanding?
Well, I think one of the differences between actual stories and real life is that in stories you have those penny drop moments, and it's like it's a moment of I finally understand the world in a new way, and that's the story. That's the shrunken time version. And in reality, of course, it happens over a long period of time. I do remember very vividly reading. I forget which book it was, but reading a book. I think it was a book by a guy called Michael Gazzaniga, who's a neuroscientist, and writing down the hero maker, the brain is a hero maker, and feeling like, God, I think that's it. I think that's the thing, and that has ended up being this sort of single idea that I've pursued in my writing ever since. For more than probably I say more than 15 years, perhaps, something like that. Yeah. So that was that really. And then when I was doing my research, of course, then that really organizes how you're kind of journalistically interviewing people, and so one of the kind of toughest things I did in The Heretics was I went and hung out with a bunch of like Nazis for a week.
Oh,
And
wow.
they weren't like fake, like pretend Nazis, they were
Yeah.
real actual Nazis.
Whoa.
Yeah, and I had to pretend that I was a Nazi, like one of them. So it was quite scary at times. I mean, it was really scary at times. Because they became a bit suspicious of me. I was a Guardian journalist at the time, so I wasn't very nice. And so on that, what that was there's this historian called David Irving, who's a really, really smart man and was once a really highly respected historian. And he came upon this crazy idea one time that Hitler was a friend of the Jews. That's what he thinks.
Oh, wow.
And Hitler didn't know anything about the Holocaust. It was all the other Nazis and all this stuff. So it's a crazy idea. It's a mad idea. But like, he's a really smart guy. So the question is, how on earth do people come to this conclusion?
Yeah.
And so whilst I was on that trip, so he gives these tours, these like crazy tours of World War II sites, concentration camps, but he gives his own version of what actually happened there.
No way.
Yeah, and it costs thousands. I forget how much. It costs thousands of pounds to go on these trips, and so it was kind of, it was scary. It was, I'm not going to lie, it was quite intimidating. And then slowly, what I realised was all these people that were on the trip, or at least most of them, had parents who were Nazis in the Second World War. Like on the last night of the holiday, there was this screening of the film Downfall. I don't know if you know the film Downfall. It's a German film where it's like the last days in the Hitler bunker, like super realistic, about what happened. Into Hitler's final kind of week, I think it was. And one of the guys on the trip, he said, I don't want to watch the film because it's too upsetting for me. It's triggering. And the reason it was upsetting for him is because his dad was there in the bunker with Hitler, and he was going to see his dad die, essentially. And then that was a penny drop moment, because I think, Jesus Christ, all of these people have mums and dads who were Nazis, and they love their mums and dads, of course, and they don't want to believe that they're not, that the Nazis are now a synonym for evil, of course, but they don't want to believe their mums and dads were Nazis. I mean, dads probably, principally, let's be honest. So they're on this lifelong mission to experience the world in such a way that people who say the Holocaust really happened, well, they're lying. And the people, so that's how that kind of storytelling works. And that was a real moment of, they're just telling a heroic story about their parents, and in a kind of weird, twisted way. It comes from a place of love. They love their parents, and it's too confronting for them, it's too upsetting for them to consider that their parents had done things that were truly, absolutely evil. And so that was this kind of, that's the brain working in full effect, and that is how smart people can end up believing crazy things, because it's more important that we feel good about ourselves and the people that we hang out with than it is that we actually discover the truth.
Firstly, that's so insane. I'm surprised they were even allowed to do tours like that. I thought stuff like that was illegal. If he's doing a tour of like, this is what happened, maybe, wink, wink.
Well, he's actually banned from Germany. He's banned. He actually went to prison. He's so locked into his ideas that he was taken to court, and he refused to disown them in court, and he went to prison in his 70s. So he sincerely believes this stuff.
Right.
He's not making it up. He really, really believes it. And so, of course, he's been excommunicated from the intellectual world, but he's also not allowed he's certainly not allowed in Germany, I don't think. So this was in Poland, and the former Nazi territories.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. Something that I wanted to ask you about was because the whole idea of you being the hero of your own story, which is like you being the main person in your life, and everything kind of like revolves or unfolds around that. Because that you're your own hero in your story, you think that what you're doing is right. Most people believe that what they're doing is right. And in the science of storytelling, you talk about how Pol Pot, how Mao, how Stalin, they all thought and believed that what they were doing is right. So like, where is that line between I'm a person who thinks and believes that me leading my life, I'm the main person, and what I'm doing is right, and the paradigm, how I see life, is correct, and my version of reality is right. Between that and then going into the line of that guy, what was his name? David Irving crossing that line of, okay, no, you've reached madness. Like, at what point do we as society kind of excommunicate someone and go, no, like your version is not right anymore,
Well, obviously that's a very topical question, and perhaps I think there's quite a generational divide on this. I don't really think there is a line, but unless it's really somebody that is, we have laws in place about hate speech and about encouraging violence, which I would endorse, but I think that for example, my writing about neo-Nazis is going to help you understand why people become neo-Nazis, and why what they're saying isn't true. Part of what I was doing is writing about was saying, well, look, they say this, but they've misunderstood this. And in order for me to have written that, they had to have been allowed to say what they were going to say. I think the thing about stories is they're very persuasive. And if you hear just one story, you could be really convinced. I mean, I remember after 9/11, I've still got it here somewhere, this book written by a professor of philosophy, I think it was, arguing that 9/11 was an inside job. I remember reading this thinking, oh my God, 9/11 was an inside job, and it wasn't, and for a while I really believed that. I really did. I was a journalist at the time, because it's so persuasive.
Yeah.
And I think we really underestimate how really smart people can end up in a really weird place, but also how persuasive they can be if we don't allow in other voices. And that allowing in other voices, even if they make us really uncomfortable, I think is essential if we're to actually work out what is rational and true. And the more you sort of cancel out other voices, the more difficult things come. And we don't have to look back far in history to see that happening. You've only got to look back at the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany. That's what they were up to. That's the definition for me of fascism, is when you're silencing people, is saying, no, only our opinions are allowed to be expressed, and we're going to punish you if you express different opinions. So that's how I see that. I think I think the line is, I mean, your question was, the line is, are we imposing our beliefs on other people to a degree that's unhealthy?
Yeah, exactly. Just because when I was reading your book, of course it's true that we're the main characters in our life, but it just made me think, like, what is the line between where you are doing that and when it crosses over into like narcissism or self-obsession, or your reality is kind of like distorted by other things around you. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense.
So how do we know when we've crossed the line into madness?
Kind of, exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't really talk about that too much in the Science of Storytelling, but I do talk about it a lot in the book I've just finished writing.
Okay, what's the one you just finished writing?
So it's called The Status Game.
Okay.
I write about status games a little bit in the Science of Storytelling, but it's a book. It's a book. It's not out till September. But what I talk about in that is that we belong to multiple groups, right? Political groups, friend groups. That's we have these sort of multiple kind of tribes, and I think each of those tribes has, or often has, sacred beliefs. I write about sacred beliefs in the Science of Storytelling. And sacred beliefs are those beliefs or those ideas or symbols around which, if anybody treads on them, we get irrationally upset. We get really, the blood pumps, and we really feel like we want to strike back. And those sacred things can be flags. Like, you can imagine if you go to America and burn an American flag, people are going to go mad. It's just a bit of cloth. It doesn't mean anything realistically, but it's a sacred thing for them in a way that it isn't so much for lots of British people. Of course, it is for some, but not for lots. And beliefs are like that too. So there are certain beliefs. For David Irving, he had a sacred belief in that 6 million Jews didn't die in the Holocaust. Like, he agrees now that it happened, but he's that. I think that I seem to remember that was the idea that he wouldn't. He was invited to agree with in court, and he refused to. And why not? Because it might get you off a prison sentence, but it was such an important thing for him, he wouldn't do it, so he was sent to prison. That's a sacred belief, and I think that's the tell, really. I think if we're living in a place in which we have lots of sacred beliefs, that's a real warning sign, because when things become sacred, we stop being able to think rationally about them. It's really important to understand, I think, that your brain, the very thing through which you're experiencing reality, can become kind of twisted and warped and start feeding you a version of reality which literally isn't true. So we all know people, and we've all met people who are really smart and nice in lots of ways, and we think, bloody hell, how can they believe that? That's mad. But they're looking at us with just exactly the same sense of absolute assurance that they're right. I remember saying, my mum, I was brought up in a very quite a strict Catholic household, and I remember my mum saying to my mum when I was a stroppy teenager, if you were born in India, you wouldn't be a Catholic. And she said, yes, I would. And I remember thinking, no, you bloody wouldn't. And it's that. So and it's just this idea that if she was born in India, she may well be a Hindu, right? And she'd be looking at a Catholic going, how can you believe all that Catholic rubbish?
Yeah.
just as she might, I mean, she wouldn't say that about Hindus at all, my mum, you know, but just to imagine a Catholic saying that about Hindus, they're both equally convinced they're wrong. So you just think, well, you know, and that's brains that you know, they're very, very capable of making us believe things that are completely wrong, and they do it all the time, you know, and it's not weird, it's not unusual, it's standard brain behavior. And as I say, the tell is when when there are lots of ideas that trigger you, you know, because as soon as you're triggered, you're not in a space of rationality anymore.
Yeah, there was something in your book that was saying that if you want to find where people are most irrational, or look at what they like firmly believe in. It wasn't that, but it was something like that. And it's really crazy to think that your identity as to who you are is so built on these beliefs that for some reason, or like how you said, in the first 2 decades of your life, that's kind of where you form this identity, or like your paradigm of, or who you are as a character based on everything that's happened in your life most of the time up until that point. Have you ever because I was trying to wonder when I was reading this book, okay, what are beliefs that I have that contribute to my identity that potentially I'm wrong on, potentially, like, even that using the word potentially goes to show how I'm already defensive on like how I don't want to change.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, as I say, it's similar to what I said before. I think in stories, people suddenly realize I'm wrong about all this, and I think in real life it's this slow attrition. You know, you realize that you're wrong about stuff, and I think one of the sort of really fun things about being a non-fiction storyteller is that you're kind of trying to be wrong about stuff. You know, like as a journalist, it was always brilliant when you found out you were wrong about stuff, because that's a great story moment, you know. And so you know, as a journalist, I was always looking for, you know, one of those is with the Nazis. You know, I went on the Nazi trip thinking these are monsters. Of course, they believe monstrous things, and I would never defend Nazis. But you leave with a greater sense of their humanity. You know, that was a real like bloody hell moment when the guy mentioned his dad was in the bunker. I suddenly understood him, and he went from being this crazy monster to like this wounded, mistaken, you know, animal, really. So that's one of them, you know. So yeah, you know, and you know, my first book, which I wrote when I was in my 20s, was kind of about that. I was a magazine journalist, and I mentioned my Catholic upbringing, very, very strongly anti-religious, very, very strongly atheist. And then I went on a story. I can't tell you the whole story because it's too long, but I basically went on a magazine trip with a ghost hunter in America, and just saw all this really fucking crazy shit. And that was a moment where I really span out and was like, everything I thought I knew about the world might be wrong. You know, so that book is the story of me trying to work out what the hell was going on.
Whoa, that must have been such a kind of like shatter of identity, where you're like trying to glue it back together, like being like, please, can this not fall apart? Or intrigued, I guess, by it falling apart.
If my mum's right. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so going back to, in terms of how story came about and how humans kind of created stories or language to communicate things with each other, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you know, about the purpose of story and tribe.
Yeah, and why they started.
So that's a really good question. Yeah, so one of the things that in my research I thought was just amazing was that the current kind of dominant theory about why we develop language, the ability to speak, is to swap gossip. And that just sounds like a mad thing, like gossip. But gossip is this universal thing. Everybody in the world does it. Men do it just as much as women do, contrary to the kind of sexist myth. But the only caveat is that men don't do it so much when women are around. But as soon as women are gone, they just start gossiping, which I thought was really funny. So you know, it's inbuilt. Children start gossip, like doing kind of rudimentary gossip almost as soon as they can talk, start telling tales on people. And so why is that? Well, it's because human beings are a species of ape. You know, we're not like an ape. We actually are great apes. Obviously, we're weird apes. And one of the things that's really weird about us is that we've mastered the art of cooperation. So we divide labor. You do this, I'll do that. And essentially, that's how we've taken over the world. Because if you divide labor as a group, you can do amazing things. You know, you can build nations, you can go to space. But in order to keep those groups cooperative, there had to be a kind of policing. because people are pricks. People can be pricks now. People were pricks 10,000 years ago. We haven't evolved that much. So how do you control these people without there's no police force, there's no judiciary, there's no newspapers? Well, you do it with gossip. So you start telling stories about each other, and the stories are always morally inflected. They're about good guys and bad guys. I mean, guys in a non-gendered way, of course, and so how that works is people in the tribe start gossiping about you. And if the gossip is, they did this amazing thing, they saved the child from the stream, you'd be raised as a hero and celebrated. But most gossip is actually negative. Most gossip is, he chucked the kid in the stream, And so what happens then is you experience moral outrage and you punish the person. And so that's how the tribe keeps cooperative, because that if you do anything wrong, do anything against the tribe, you're going to be punished, or you might be punished by mockery, humiliation, ostracization, or even execution would be the ultimate punishment. And it's thought that execution was once universal. Everybody was involved, with all tribes had execution as the ultimate punishment. So story has this kind of amazing, story is what makes us human. Literally, it's what's enabled us to be human and take over the world. But it has a kind of dark history. Story is conventional storytelling, archetypal storytelling 10,000 years ago, and in Hollywood today is morally inflected. It's about good people and bad people. And that can be really inspiring. It can make us think, I want to be like Gandhi, I want to be like or whoever, or Greta Thunberg or whoever. But it can also equally be really dangerous, because once you're creating good people, you're also creating villains, bad people. And so it creates this kind of moral binary, and it divides the world into heroes and villains. And that's what happens when you have a storytelling brain. And that's what you see everywhere, online, offline, everywhere, is people dividing the world into heroes and villains. I think one of the themes of my books is this idea that we have to be aware of that kind of dangerous power of the storytelling brain, because it constantly leads us into these terrible situations where we divide the world in good people and bad people. We cut off empathy. We fail to see that this is a wounded person making a big mistake, and we say you're a monster. And then once you said somebody's a monster, I mean, monsters don't exist. Monsters are things literally out of fairy tales. But we use that phrase all the time. And once you start saying they're a monster, they're a Nazi, they're this, that, the other, it gives you permission to treat them, in the most appalling ways. And that's what we do continually as people. We cast them in the role of villain. And as soon as we've done that, attacking them makes us the hero.
Do you think that's a survival mechanism in order for us to, because I know you talk a lot about controlling chaos or controlling, our brain is trying to do that, control a lot. So do you think that we rely on casting people as good people, bad people, because we want to put them in a box so we know how to control them or not control them?
I don't think. I think that's right. But I think it all goes. So when we're talking about the storytelling brain, we're talking about parts of the brain that are wired to behave like this, because as far as the brain's concerned, we're still living in those Stone Age tribes. We haven't evolved since those Stone Age tribes. All of this evolution happened when we were living in Stone Age tribes. So it was important that we saw the world like that in those Stone Age tribes, because life was really tough. It was really hard. Life expectancy was around 30 years old in those tribes. So that's how hard life was. And so you had to put the tribe first. And so if somebody didn't put the tribe first, they were selfish, if they hoarded the meat or, were put in some way put themselves before the interest of the tribe, they'd have to be punished. So these are very, very strong mechanisms, and so it was about survival then. The brain ultimately, like all living things, we have those Darwinian drives, survive and reproduce. And for a human being, survival and reproduction is about being accepted into a tribe and doing well in that tribe, and the people that worked against the tribe, they were villains. They'd have to be punished. But of course, the problem is we now, it's not life or death now.
Yeah.
but we still think like that. We still think, if somebody online says something that we think is outrageous,
yeah,
we react like it's life or death, and we
cancel them.
cancel them, and so all that cancelling that you're seeing at the moment, that's the Stone Age brain still behaving as if it's life or death when it isn't.
Yeah.
Just because Pennsylvania says something dumb,
Yeah.
let them have a job.
Yeah. I know, I'm with you on that. I think cancel culture is too insane. But do you think then, to do with morality, and when you hear a story or gossip and finding out whether it's a good story or good person or bad person, etc., do you think that stories created what's like a good way to behave in terms of like a moral conduct, and from those stories, that's how we understood, okay, this is how we should behave, this is how should we be cooperative with each other? Or do you think that as humans, we already naturally know what's kind of good and bad, and then from that, the stories came?
It's a slightly complicated answer. So in terms of morality, there are parts of morality which are inbuilt in our in our consciousness, in our brains, and we're born with them, and they're universal. So wherever you go in the world, there are basic moral ideas, and those moral ideas are the ones that kept the tribe together. So it's like, put the tribe before you, be courageous, people like courageous people, share resources, respect authority. So these are very, very basic foundations for morality that everyone's kind of born with these rules in place. And it's thought there are 7 rules. I can't remember what they are at the moment, but there are 7 basic rules that we're born with, and they basically all amount to one thing, and that's be selfless. So all around the world, selflessness is the basis of moral good. Selfishness is the basis of moral bad, because as we've been saying, selflessness means you're putting the tribe first. That's what we're programmed to want to do. But on top of those kind of basics, there's a huge amount of variety, so because on top of those basics, you've got culture. So you're born with those ideas that are kind of embedded, but you're born into this culture. You're born into a time and place with its own moral ideas. So so you can say, well, the basis of morality is, one of them is respect authority. But what's authority telling you to do? Authority can tell you to do all kinds of things. So one of the things that we tend to do is copy authority figures. Or the ones that we identify with. Hitler was an authority figure. Stalin was an authority figure. Millions of people copied them. We wouldn't call those people morally good, but they were selflessly putting themselves on behalf of the Nazi tribe. Hitler, all those Nazis that were dying for the Nazis were being courageous. So is that morally good? Well, no, it isn't. From our perspective, it's horrific, but from their perspective, they're moral heroes. So and there's a huge amount of morals change massively as you go around the world. In the West, we're much more individualistic, so we're much more interested in the rights of the individual. In other parts of the world, they're more collectivist, so they're more interested in the rights of the group. And if one person suffers unjustly for the benefit of the group, it's seen as not such a big deal. To us, it's horrific, but for other cultures, it's seen as not such a big deal. And they think we're mad, but we think they're mad. That's how it works. And it also changes as you go about in time. If you look at some of the things that Gandhi said, Gandhi was really racist.
Really?
Against black people. Yeah, he was.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah, because lots of people were back then. We know better now, but because we've evolved. And part of that evolution is we know so much more about psychology. We know so much more about how stuff actually works. So we know that there's no basis for racist ideas anymore, but they didn't know that then. They just saw the world and one part was more developed than another and made a racist assumption. Mary Stopes, who's a big feminist hero, was also a eugenicist and a sympathizer with the Nazis. Mary Stopes, who had a series of Royal Mail stamps dedicated to her a few years ago, believed some things that would get her cancelled in less than a second. These days, stuff that and you might, even if you're against cancel culture, you might think, actually, I would make an exception. Some of the things that she wrote were horrific about people with disabilities should be prevented from procreating. It was sort of ideas in that kind of area. But it's easy to judge from our position and look back in time and go, well, you're obviously a monster. She didn't think she was a monster. Lots of people had those ideas at the time. So so yeah, morality is incredibly fluid. It changes as you move about in geographic space. It changes as you go about in historical space. And so that's why I think we've seen a huge evolution in the last 20 years in moral norms. Pre Me Too, we had a certain set of ideas, and then post Me Too, they've changed. Rightly, I think, and most people think, I hope. But that's a rapid change in moral norms, and lots of them are getting caught out because how they were behaving in 2003 is not okay in 2030 or 2021. So yeah, it's kind of a cruel thing, really, because it's not. I don't think it's reasonable to look back in time and go, well, who you were then isn't okay today, because we're constantly evolving. Unlike physical evolution, moral evolution can be extremely rapid.
So, but you would say that ultimately there are just like fundamentals, like you mentioned, which we understand, and that's kind of where the basis of storytelling from those tribes would have come from, in terms of like, this is good, this is bad, and then there are all these other layers that change and develop throughout time.
Yeah, totally. And each tribe has its own moral norms. Each tribe has its own interpretation of what's good and bad, its own, supernatural beliefs. And those beliefs are encoded in the stories that they tell. There's two kinds of stories. There's gossip, but there's also those campfire stories about supernatural forces and, amazing ancestors. And in both of those different kinds of stories, what you're seeing is, what they're implicitly telling you is, this is what a hero does. This is how a hero behaves. And so that's part of the way that you're learning the rules of your tribe. I didn't manage to squeeze it into the science of storytelling, but when I was doing my research, I bought an old book from the 1930s in America about how to tell stories. And it appealed to me because it was like the idea of the book. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like, your character comes first or something. I was like, well, I agree with that. I'll buy the book. And it was a horrific book.
Why?
It said, and this is a mainstream book published by a mainstream publisher, it says, here are some do's and don'ts about storytelling. Never tell stories against big business, because people love big business, and you'll put the reader off. And I was like, that is not what we would think. And then it said, never tell stories about mixed race couples, because nobody wants to hear stories about mixed race couples. And of course you're horrified. That was just mainstream reality less than 100 years ago. That was mainstream reality for our grandparents or my grandparents.
It's interesting with grandparents, especially when they have beliefs, because like my grandparents, I think now they change, but like when I was younger, I remember my grandparents, they grew up in the middle of nowhere in Ireland, weren't like racist, I would say, but definitely a little bit racist, and to a certain extent, it's just like, well, at what point, when someone grew up with a belief and that's what built their identity, or not even necessarily what built their identity, but just something that they've grown up believing, and that's just been normal amongst their community, at what point do you say like, oh no, we've changed now, you have to change it, or you just like leave it and you're just like, you live your own life? And
I think it all goes back to empathy. My grandparents are dead, so my grandmother, I don't remember, my grandmother was the only relative of that generation I knew as a child, and she was a little bit racist, and she said some things that really shocked me. I was brought up in a left-wing household, went to a comprehensive school, full of left-wing minded people, and she said a couple of things that really shocked me when I was young, and you're right. It's like it's easy to judge, but I tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, people in 100 years' time will be listening to what we're saying and be judging us just as harshly. I know it's a banal thing to say because everyone says it, but it seems really clear that we're going to look back at how we treat animals and be horrified by that. I mean, I've got a dog lying next to me, and I'll be eating an animal this evening. I mean, I can't justify that, but I'm doing it, and we're at this weird point in history where that moral belief I think is changing rapidly, especially as we're getting lab-grown meat, and so that's one of the I think that's one of the things. It's just really obvious. It's really obvious that we're going to be judged so harshly for that. But we were growing up, everyone's eating meat, and nobody really knew that animals have this whole range of emotions. People thought that animals were just sort of like plants but moved around. So just as people, it's easy to judge our grandparents, we will definitely be judged for our moral norms.
In terms of empathy, I wanted to talk to you about this because I think empathy is absolutely, of course, fundamental. And in terms of like with the grandparents thing, you do have to empathize with them and understand like where they came from, and to not approach those things, I think, like with judgment or with criticism, because what's the point, you know? Like how you said, people will be doing that with us, and they have to approach these kinds of things with empathy. One of the facts in your book that kind of shook me was that there was a study that was done that with strangers, you kind of understand about 20% of like what they're trying to say or their reality or what they mean. And then with friends and loved ones, it's around like 35%, it can be. And so I was just wondering, like, one, when you speak to people, and I don't know whether it's the kind of thing where when you read a book and you're like, it's in the fervent, you know, forehead of your mind and you're thinking about it constantly. But now when you speak to people or when writing that book or whatever, are you aware that what you're saying and like actively thinking about it and what they're saying or how they mean something might not be how you understand it? Like, do you think from your studies and writing that book that you're way more empathetic with people because you kind of understand more now that we probably are seeing everything completely differently?
Well, I don't know about from writing the book, but I do. Yeah, I mean, so it's findings like that. So the first thing is it has made me a lot less sure of myself. Like I very often say to my wife, like it'd be a sense check. Like, how do you think that went? That was weird. Do you think, did I upset them? Did I say something wrong? And usually she's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know, but then maybe she's wrong. So like, it does make me much less kind of aware, you know, much less confident in my own kind of perceptions. Yeah, that's true. But in terms of the kind of empathy thing, I think it hasn't really been about this book. It's, you know, I've been a journalist since 2000 for 21. Well, I've stopped doing journalism really now, but you know, I was a journalist for 20 years, and a feature journalist. So which meant I was going around the world just meeting people and just, you know, long form stuff. So really getting to know them. And that's obviously, I think that's informed all my books. And I think it's really that. It's one of the first things that really struck me when I began doing that kind of work was that I was always wrong. You know, I would go into situations with all these preconceptions that I'd got from the media, from whatever, and I would always be wrong about a lot of it. And you know, we're talking about the grandparents and the Nazis. I think you've got to separate out the kind of you can criticize people. You can say, well, I think you're completely wrong about that, and you're not being fair about that. You know, my grandmother was completely wrong about that. But you can separate out that kind of, you know, there's an element that becomes about moral judgment that makes you feel better about yourself, and you're kind of looking down at them and you're going, oh, you're a monster. I think that's what you have to separate out, because mostly what you get are, you know, there are what we, you know, the monsters that you can accept that there are sociopaths and there are psychopaths.
Yeah.
These are people who have empathy deficits. They've got something wrong with them. They're mentally ill, essentially, or they have, you know, serious personality disorders. But apart from that very, very small subset of the human race, what you're dealing with is people that have made a mistake. They're wrong about something. You know, that's what they've done. Right. You know, so. You know, 200 years ago, when pretty much everybody was racist, they were wrong. They were just wrong. You know, they saw the West versus the rest of the world, and they went, well, Western people are better. You know, you can see why they made that mistake. It would have felt intuitively true, but we know much more about why certain parts of the world developed quicker, and it's to do with geography, to do with accident, it's to do with farming. You know, it's really complicated, and none of it is to do with people being better than anybody else. It's just to do, you know, all these complex forces. So people make mistakes. That's essentially what you're seeing, even in the most kind of heated political debates. Is that well, it's not even. I don't even think it's that one side is right and one side is wrong. What you're seeing mostly is that one side has part of the truth, another side has another part of the truth, and they're just refusing to see each other's part of the truth. That's generally what what you're seeing. You know, you know, in the UK, the Labour have part of the truth, the Tories have part of the truth, but they refuse to see each other's truth, and they do the story of you're evil. But actually, we need them. You know, we need them both fighting each other and working out that kind of correct middle course. I think in most.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think in most of the fraught conflicts we have, the truth is that both sides are partly right and partly wrong.
Yeah.
And they insist on being wholly right, and that's why you get all the conflict.
One of the quotes that you or that you have in your book is how you talk about life is, let me get it up, life is us just trying to control, I think it was the chaos. I'll bring it up in a sec. But to control it. And this is kind of the existential thing that I was dealing with when I was reading your book, because of what you're talking about, even there with the left and the right. And people so fervently believe that what they're saying is correct. And what you said of when it gets to the point where you're just trying to prove something to a moral high ground, then that's kind of where it's maybe bad. But up until that point, like, people really believe that what they're doing is correct, and they're just trying to see out in their life the story that they think is the right one to play. And it just seems so futile, things to argue over and to fight over, I guess, to experience the whole up and down of life. But it just seems crazy, because if we never fully understand each other, and we all come from such different places anyway, that we'll never that we might never come to like an agreement on things. Yeah.
One of the things that if there's one thing that I think you could do to change the world, it would be to actually teach this stuff at school. I think that one of the problems that we have just as a fucking species is that we don't understand what we are. We fall for that brain spun myth that says we're heroes in stories, but we're not heroes in stories. That the story is this invention by the brain to make us feel good about ourselves and our tribe, the people that we are with. And I think if you taught this kind of basic psychology in school, and some of the history of the evolution, and you're taught principles about when to know you're wrong, about that you're in danger of being wrong, some of these basics would be really, I think it would be really useful, because as you say, where are we going to end up if we just keep on? I think one of the dangerous things about these stories is that the more you get lost in them, the more crazy they tend to become, and the more you become convinced in the truth of your own heroism, the more irrational you become, and the more capable of actually doing evil you become. I mean, that's the thing about the communists and the Nazis. They genuinely believe they were on the right side of history. They genuinely believe they were punching up, to use what sort of modern parlance. But we know from history they did horrific. They killed millions and millions and millions of people, in the most horrific ways. And they did that. They did that because they were absolutely convinced of their moral truth. One of the things I thought was interesting about Donald Trump, that I always kind of said about him, having done the kind of work for science and storytelling, was that I never thought he was actually going to do anything. When he first got elected, it was like, he's the new Hitler. Yeah. And I just thought, well, I don't think he's the new Hitler, because he's not. He doesn't have that. He doesn't seem to believe that he's a moral person. Like, I think he knows he's a bit crooked.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So Donald Trump's, most of his, I know there was terrible things happening at the border, but there were terrible things happening at the border before, and there are also going to be terrible things happening at the border when let's go after Donald Trump. So I know I'm not defending moral Donald Trump. But what I'm saying is that he is this small-minded businessman. And his level of evil is, how can I make as much money out of this presidency as possible? I'm going to up the fees for my private members club. I'm going to get my daughter into, he's a business. He's just a hustler. He's hustling for himself. Whereas what George W. Bush and Tony Blair did was they sincerely believed they were on some moral good and went and killed millions of Iraqis. I'd rather have this, so you got Donald Trump without his big moral mission to save the world. I mean, I know he talks about making America great again, but he really seemed to me like somebody who was in it for himself. It was just like the sequel of The Apprentice's presidency. But the ones you've got to really watch for are the George W. Bushes of the world, who are absolutely convinced, I'm on a moral hero to save the world, a moral mission to save the world, because they're the ones that kill millions of people, not these grifters like Donald Trump.
That really makes sense, and I think is quite a good reminder, or a way to put it, in terms of like, okay, you can be the hero of your story, but if you get to the point where you believe that you're like the hero of lots of people's stories, or that you're a hero and that lots of people are like need you, and you genuinely believe that, I think that's when it crosses over into danger zone.
Yeah, and you can see how that works, because if you are George W. Bush or Tony Blair or Stalin or Hitler, you've got no shortage of people telling you every day you're a hero.
Yeah.
You're like thousands and thousands of people saying you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing. They're terrible. So it's so easy to forget. It's obvious, but it's so easy to forget that George W. Bush, Tony Blair, Stalin, and Hitler, they're just people like you and me.
Yeah.
They're like, I want to say they're no different, because they're a bit different, but they're not really. Got the same brains, they've got the same flaws as any of us. And it's like it's like the old trope of celebrities, celebrities, Kanye West and Madonna, they go a bit crazy, but if you're Madonna, it's kind of funny, or Mariah Carey, we can laugh at people like that. But they go crazy because they have so many people saying you're a hero, and the brain is so determined to make us feel like a hero that it just accepts it all, and their brain become a bit weird, but Madonna and Kanye West don't really have any power, particularly apart from over their staff. The poor people have to work for them. But these presidents and kind of dictators, they have a lot of power, and that's when it becomes really dangerous.
When you spoke about how life is pretty much, stories are pretty much a roller coaster, except instead of kind of nuts and bolts, you have things within stories like hope and love and betrayal. Do you think that is pretty much what life is? It's pretty much just up and down, and us trying to make sense of whatever's going on. And the reason why we do that is because the idea of death or whatever, that we're in a species that are the only potential species that knows that life is meaningless. So do you think that is literally just why we've made stories, as kind of like a coping mechanism?
It's not the only, because I think we made stories to keep the tribes together. It starts off as a policing method, but it ends up giving us meaning. You can see religion as a story, you can see nationalism as a story. They're kind of, if you're a nationalist, you're in this story world that it really matters what country you were born in. I mean, I haven't got a nationalist bone in my body. I think it's weird. But people really believe, like there are lots of Scottish people that are really proud of their Scottishness, and Irish people, as I'm sure you know. But that story gives them meaning, because they go out and they fly the flag and they go to a parade or whatever they do, nationalists do, and it gives them meaning, and they forget that they're going to die, that they're going to get sick, that none of it actually matters. Who cares what country you're born in? It doesn't matter. But it matters for them. And religion is the same. Religion is this kind of is this story world. It's like going to Narnia. If you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu, you're in Narnia now, and you've got this whole story world, and it's got its own rules of who you should be. And it's got its own set of beliefs by which you can become heroic. So and that's how religion has worked for a long time. Organized religion. One of the reasons it's so successful is because it allows anybody, no matter how poor you are or how underprivileged you are, to feel heroic. To say, well, I might be living in a shanty town on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, but I've done God's work today, and you feel good. And so that's that's where I think the atheists get it wrong. I mean, it's not so fashionable now, but in the early 2000s it was very fashionable to be atheist, and Richard Dawkins and all these people that were very condescending about religion, and very kind of cruel, really, in the way they talked about people with religious belief. And I never kind of, I always kind of reacted against that, despite being atheist, and because I think it does. I think the ignorance there is in this understanding that you're this big atheist, and you enable yourself to feel like a hero by saying, oh, it's all just woo woo and rubbish. But what about all these other people? They should be able to feel like a hero too, and that's what the brain wants to do. It wants to find a way to be a hero, and and unless you're clinically depressed and you're lying in bed and you feel the world is overpoweringly difficult to deal with, and it's impossible to be a hero, your brain's going to find a way to make you feel heroic.
Right.
That's what it does, and it's an amazing thing, because if it wasn't an amazing thing, we'd probably all be like jumping off cliffs.
Yeah.
What's the point?
What's the point? Yeah.
What's the fucking point?
Yeah,
there isn't any point. So you have to come up with these stories that make you feel like there's a point.
That's so funny that your brain does that to you, because I think you can go through such moments where maybe like breaking the third wall isn't the right kind of term to use, but you do break through that, where at times you see things and you're like, what's the point? Like this, you kind of accept that life is meaningless and there's no point to anything, but then a while later you'll become like amazingly engaged with something or interested in something, and like you talk about in the book, like your brain creates causes and effects and like really cares about the causes and effects, and you spend a lot of time thinking about what could happen and what might happen and what might create a good story. That I guess, it's just amazing that your brain has evolved to create that, to give you some reason. That sounds really sad, to give you some reason to live, but like to contribute to your meaning.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, every living thing wants to survive and reproduce. It just does, and that whether you're a blade of grass or a human being, and that's the way we do it. We connect into groups, we cooperate, but in order to keep those groups functional, there has to be stories. Firstly, to police behaviour, but secondly, to impute meaning onto what you're doing. People who collect, I don't know, what do people collect? People who collect stamps, they think it's really important that, and that when they get this stamp, they're going to tell all their friends, look at this stamp. They're going, that's an amazing stamp. And look, from outside, it just seems stupid, but it's no more stupid than having this particular car or this particular, it's just, or this many followers on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. It's just, it's really good that the brain is able to make meaning from pretty much anything, because that's how can you argue against meaning? I mean, we have to have meaning.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
what's the point? Yeah.
What's the point? And that's the absolute definition of depression, isn't it? It's like there's no meaning, and there's nothing I can do to become heroic. That is the definition of misery.
In your book, you talk about how characters, that what drives drama is the question, who am I? Is that the same for your life and your brain?
What drives drama is,
well, that question, who am I? How that kind of, you're constantly, with people writing stories and developing characters, how you're constantly trying to work out who they are.
I think that's more in the realm of kind of writing advice.
Okay.
I think people seem to be sort of quite sure about who they are. They have these ideas about who they are, and those ideas are often wrong. They have kind of, people have very quite fixed ideas about who they are. And what you often see in story is, at the beginning of really good stories, what you see is people's fixed ideas about who they are suddenly being challenged. And that's the stuff that I think that makes really great stories, is that they're thrown to this place where they have to suddenly question, oh God, maybe everything that I thought about life and myself is actually wrong.
Have you ever had one of those moments where you were like, oh no, like everything that I thought is wrong, or that you like questioned your like identity massively? Because I guess someone said something, or you came across something where you thought, that you thought everything that you knew was wrong up until that point.
Well, as I say, I think those things kind of happen gradually. I've had a few moments where somebody said something that's really made me question myself. I remember once, I was working with a magazine once, and there was another guy. We were all at the pub after work, and we're all Big Brother fans. I'm a massive Big Brother fan. We're talking about Big Brother, and the deputy editor said, and there's another guy. There was a guy who also in the office was quite difficult, and people found him quite difficult. And let's just say his name is Bob. His name wasn't Bob, but let's say his name Bob. And my deputy said, the thing about Bob and Will is they're the kind of people that be voted out first, aren't they? And everyone went, yeah. And I remember thinking, oh God, that was it really was just like, fuck, am I really hard to work with? I mean, as it is, I've been working on my own now for 15 years. So I think that's probably the answer. I think I am quite hard to work with. That was one of them. And just, I think another big one was, I guess it's not so dramatic, but I think my wife and I went on this kind of weird journey of suddenly understanding we didn't actually want children. After having tried to have children for a long time, and my wife was on the verge of going for IVF, and we suddenly realized we didn't want children. Really? And it was like that. It was such a weird thing, because it was like as soon as I can't even remember who brought it up first. It was either me or her, obviously. But as soon as one of us said it, we were like, oh yeah, we don't want them, do we? and it was, I remember, as soon as we decided we weren't going to have children, it was like a weight had been lifted. It was like, oh, I get to enjoy the rest of my life. I don't have to like stop having fun and like doing what I want.
Yeah.
And my wife is my wife earns more than I do, so it would have been me that would have to give up my career.
Right.
I was like, oh, brilliant! I get to carry on writing and everything. She gets to carry on with her career, because obviously as you know, it would have impacted her career too, even if she did end up going back to work. So yeah, that was one of those weird things where, you know, we had the thermometers and the apps, and you know, we were just doing everything.
Wow.
And all along we didn't want them, and we never questioned it. And so I think that's how it happens in real non-story world quite often. It's just this. It's a slow real, you know, it's a slow realization. Although that was quite, I don't know what it was. Yeah, I think it's that slow realization.
It sounds like it's one of those things that when things are so normalized in culture or like in everyday life, and things are just so much assumed because people have walked that path like so many times before, that you just don't even think to question it. And it's crazy having those moments where you're like, oh yeah, I could do this. I remember I had one, and it's nothing on the same scale at all as like having kids or whatever, but my account that I use now used to be only dedicated to fitness stuff, and I at one point I really stopped enjoying it. Like I hated posting. I didn't want to post like photos of protein powder like smiling, so I was like, I find no joy in this. But I never thought you can stop, you can just not do what doesn't make you happy or that kind of thing. And I remember one person at one point being like, you know, you just don't need to carry on, and like having a moment of like, oh, and I guess that thinking about it, I hadn't actually thought about it till now, was one of those moments of like, but that forms my identity, but I guess that's not who I have to be, kind of thing. And like realizing that is, or having those kinds of moments where you question things that you think are so rudimentary and so obvious, thinking about them in a different way is really, it's like really empowering, and also quite like light in a nice way.
It is empowering. I think it's really good to have that kind of ability that you have to suddenly realize, actually, I'm wrong. Because I think a lot of people don't have that. They kind of grip on, and they don't like to admit they've been wrong about anything, or no. So yeah, I think that's a really good kind of, you know, place to be. Definitely. I you know, one of the things I think, you know, you were asking about warning signs before. I think it's when you know, we have multiple identities as humans, and I think when people kind of narrow down to kind of having just one identity, this is me, and then it becomes very hard to kind of do that kind of U-turn or evolve really, or change your mind, because once you've really staked yourself on this is who I am. And also your story really, you know, a bit like the thing with the babies, it really expresses how easy it is just to absorb the stories of our culture or our peer group. And if your peer group is all fitness people, it just feels natural and automatic. You just don't question it. And you know, my wife and I, we were going to have kids, you know, and it was like my wife, we just get a bit older, so we got to hurry up, and we never questioned it. And it just, looking back, it just seems crazy that we didn't question it. It's like we were robots. It really felt like we were robots, and it's like, why were we doing that? And you know, so yeah, I think it's really, anybody has the, like you, like me, it's so easy to just be swept along in this story of who you are, and just never kind of sit down and question it.
Another thing, and you also just mentioned it here, that I thought was really interesting and just made sense. You know, those things that aren't like hugely you know, profound, but as simple things are like, oh, that does actually just make a lot of sense. Like how you were talking about within stories, and when we form our identity, and we can adopt lots of different identities. And I think partly why with different stories we can resonate with them so much is because we see ourselves within that story. And you talk about how a good character, I think this was in a literary sense, but a good character, you can they're flawed and you can kind of resonate with them, or how often you resonate with the underdog because they are low in status, but they have the skills, and then maybe one day they'll kind of be recognized. Do you think that in life we can only, and maybe you can only apply it directly in stories, or maybe it's with people as well, I guess, that the only times when you truly like resonate or feel connected to a story or a person is when you see part of them in yourself?
I think that's true in a way, but I think the way that kind of society and culture is at the moment is developing some unhealthy ideas around that. So, for example, you might ask, well, can a middle class white man from Tunbridge Wells ever resonate with the experience of a young black girl from Soweto in the 60s? And you might say, well, no, that's ridiculous. They're completely different. But I would argue against that, because there is a common humanity there, and it might well be that story about the young black girl from Soweto is about bullying, and maybe I've been bullied, and so you can connect with that person on that level. So there are ways of identifying with people and connecting with them that are far more profound than things like skin color, gender, age. I mean, there's a huge market for historical fiction. How can people possibly identify with a pirate, or I don't know, or like, what's Wolf Hall about, like Henry VIII or whatever? But you identify them because no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter what your level of privilege, we all have so much in common. We all have the same we all have similar. We will have the human experience, and yes, on the surface those experiences are very different, but underneath it, I feel that sort of more important than that is, a kind of, I guess, the kind of pain, the particular pain that you might have experienced in your life. I think especially in our kind of first 20 years, people have certain experiences of pain, and they can be different things. They can be, ostracization, or maybe they've lost a parent or a sibling, or whatever that thing is. And I think you're going to be drawn to those kinds of stories, and I think that's a much more kind of profound idea of connection, identification, than one that might focus on our kind of gender or racial identity or sexual identity. It's perfectly possible for me to identify with somebody that looks different from me, or has a different language from me, or has a different sexuality than me, if we have our pain in common, or our hopes and dreams in common. And I think that's where that's where the true empathy begins. I think if you're wanting to kind of address a lot of these sort of difficult social justice issues, that's a really good place to start, is to actually recognize what we have in common, and often what we have in common, is our pain, and I think that's what a lot of stories, the really good stories, are about, is that you meet a person at the beginning of a story who's in pain in a certain way, and they don't know why, and they're doing something that's causing it, and they work out throughout the story, this is what I'm doing that's causing this, or if it's not them that's causing it, this is what I can do to overcome this exterior kind of threat. This is how I can become stronger in order to kind of tackle this problem.
And that makes sense as well, because when you talk about how we all have pain, and we all experience that just because we are human beings, but it's the ones where they realize that whatever their perception of life is, or whatever their pain is, if they get to a point where they are forced to change, or they realize they have to change, and then it's a question of, but are they brave enough to change? And if they are, and if they do, then those are the ones who are kind of like heroes, and I guess give us hope and make great characters who we can all aspire to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Because most of us don't do that. Most of us don't do that thing where we actually go, shit, I'm gonna have to do something about this. Like, I have to do something about this. I'm gonna have to change. Either I'm gonna have to become stronger or wiser, or something's going to be about change, and I'm gonna have to go through that really tough process of tackling this bloody problem and fixing myself. And most of us don't do it. And so that's why I think that's the true definition of a hero. And yes, often in story and in life, we're forced into a corner. We're given no choice but to change. But it's still heroic, the fact that rather than crumbling in a corner, you kind of rise up to it, and you go, actually, I'm going to do something about this. I really am. And it can be something that seems to anybody else to be small. Like if you're a really strong introvert and find going to socializing really, really difficult, then going to a party can be a heroic act. It really can be, because that is your one thing you really don't want to do. Or getting on a stage and speaking to thousands of people can be a heroic act if that's the one thing that you don't want to do. That's your dragon in the cave. And so that's why stories can be about small things. You know, they can be, but because they're small things in the kind of global sense. But to that character, to that protagonist, they couldn't be bigger.
And do you have any advice for anyone? I don't know if have you ever used storytelling in a way that's because one of the things also that you talk about is how humans, one of the things that makes us so different and like conquerors of the earth is because we've mastered the art of understanding other people's minds and like manipulating them and trying to control them, and how you spoke about in the beginning of the episode of controlling labor and like dominating the world in that way. Have you ever tried, I mean, this is probably actually a really basic question because everybody does this in every kind of conversation. Whenever you talk to people, you're manipulating them or sometimes in some way to get something that you want. But like, do you ever use structures of storytelling in times when you're not telling stories, but when you're trying to get something out of someone? Or like if you were doing a pitch, or if you're, do you know what I mean? Do you ever use it?
Okay. I do know what you mean. Yeah. So one of the offshoot courses that I taught for a while at the Guardian before COVID was a business version of the science of storytelling. So I talked about that in this, and I think so. You know, when you're in that kind of business world, you're always trying to want to control people. You want to get the investment, you want to get the job, you want to get the, you know, whatever it is. And I think the most important thing is to understand that when you're talking to somebody or negotiating with somebody, that you're not the hero in that room. They think they're the hero because they are. They're seeing the world through their kind of hero-making brain. So rather than going in there all like the big I am and saying, I'm amazing, you should work with me, the story that you're telling them is, I think you're brilliant, and I'm gonna help you become even more brilliant. That's the kind of pitch that works. You know, I think you're deserving of more status. I think you're deserving of more, whatever it is you're trying to get. And this is how I can help you be that hero that you already know you are.
Yeah.
So that's the basic structure. I mean, you know, that's if you're wanting to kind of, use it in a business context, that I think that's the mindset. And I think a lot of brands forget that. You know, there are certain brands that I've encountered, you know, like a Leica camera. Whenever you deal with Leica cameras, they're really arrogant. You know,
really?
they're kind of their kind of behavior is all like, you're lucky to have a Leica camera. What are you saying? It's broken. What are you saying? It doesn't work. Yeah, they're really obnoxious. And, you know, there are some companies that are just obnoxious.
Yeah.
And I think that's where they kind of get it wrong. You know, it's and I think that's where you see in business context all the time people walking in there, the big I am.
Yeah.
You're lucky to be working with me.
Yeah.
It's completely the opposite approach to that which works.
Which is so interesting because all of this, you know, all these layers of like jobs and business and like pitch and whatever it is, like brands and stuff, storytelling, the real message that I got from it and from you just saying this now is like the crux of it is, can you, like the fundamentalness is connection with human beings and feeling like not that someone's better than you, more so that like either you see the world how they see the world and can you connect with them in that way. And I guess just fundamentally that we all are just trying to form communities, and whether it's like work with people, form relationships with people, it's with people who we can empathize with and see ourselves within them in a non-competing competition kind of way, and which is a nice reminder, you know, we're all human beings, you know, like love is like the basis of everything, and if we could all understand each other, it would probably make the world a lot better.
Yeah, it definitely would. I mean, you know, you're never going to you know, get rid of conflict because people are always going to be competing over limited resources and battling for status and all those things. But I do think if people understood the power of the storytelling brain, understood that they're just as likely to be wrong as the person that they're kind of demonizing, there would be a lot, the conflicts that we had would be a lot less horrific in their consequences.
Well, Will, I think we have covered a lot of great ground. Do you have anything else that you would like to say about storytelling or about your upcoming book in September?
Well, yeah, September the 2nd. It's called The Status Game, and it's really applying a lot of these ideas from the science of stories. It's just sort of moving them on, really, and it's sort of bringing it kind of there's lots of there about internet culture and how we behave online and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's September the 2nd. It's a long way away. I'm sure everybody will have forgotten.
We'll do a refresher.
I just thought I'd mention it. I just thought I'd mention it just in case. There's anyone with really long memories.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. That was super interesting.
Thanks for your questions, Molly.